Recording in progress. All right. Hi there. Thank you very much, Claudia, for joining me. I wanted to ask you, did you have the opportunity to watch our previous classes on YouTube?
Oh, not really. Yesterday was my mom's birthday,
Hmm.
so I didn't have time.
Okay, that's fine. Don't worry. Don't worry, dear Claudia. Well, it's actually not that much important because we've been discussing the theoretical part of the listening section. And as I told Elsa yesterday, this part of the exam is actually very much similar to the reading section because the questions we have here in the listening section are exactly the same, but with little subtleties, that is to say, subtle changes. So I think that, anyways, we're going to continue with that tonight. And of course, if you have the chance, go to YouTube and watch those classes because it was on Tuesdays and also Wednesdays classes in which we were discussing these theoretical questions in the listening section. And tonight we're going to finalize with that. And then we're going to practice, okay? But as I say, I think it's not going to be a big deal because they are very similar. It's like exactly the same, but with little subtleties as difference. Okay, anyways, let's start with this. And we also have to discuss something actually. And you're going to notice tonight that what I tell you is true, that these questions are exactly the same. Well, not exactly, they are very much equivalent, but with little differences. Okay, well, so we had to discuss this. So for example, look at this question. The fourth question in the listening section is called, or the fourth type of question in the listening section is called detail question. And this is a rough equivalent to the detailed questions as well in the reading section, if you remember when we talked about this. And well, they deal with the specific facts from the listening section, but they are not usually as specific as detailed questions in the reading section. You remember that we discussed this in the reading section, and I told you, detailed questions are basically the ones that we receive in South America, the ones that we receive in our examinations. What did the text say about this, right? Or what did this page say about this? These are this type of question, basically. And now, in the listening section, it's exactly the same, but there is a little difference, as I told you. In the listening section, they are not that much tough, let's say, or they are not that much challenging, because in the reading section, they were super specific. In this case, given that, of course, in the listening section, you don't have the chance to listen twice to the lectures or conversations. You have to listen before you respond to the questions. They never ask very specific things in these detailed questions. They ask things that are, let's say, general, things that you could easily recognize. They never ask, for example, numbers or names, because some people have, let's say, the trauma, let's say, to write down a lot of names and numbers when they listen to those information and data on this material in the listening part, whether it is a conversation or it is a lecture. They take notes on that. If they listen, for example, a name, they write it down, a number, a date, for example, or they listen to, I don't know, to a cipher, they also write it down. And that is not very much necessary because, as I say, if they're going to ask, what did the passage say about this? They're not going to be that much picky and say, well, we want to ask you about the only number we mentioned in the conversation, for example. They are not that much picky, as I say. They ask questions, detailed questions. Yeah, indeed, they are factual. They ask about what you listen to, but they are not that much, as I say, specific. So never write numbers and names in your notes unless you perceive that they are constantly repeated. For example, if they for some reason repeat the number 70, 70, 70, 70, like 4 times, 5 times in the lecture or in the conversation, well, that's because they are suggesting you, hey, this is a very important name, excuse me, or number. And probably we're going to ask a question about this in the future. So please pay attention, right? That's more or less what they are trying to communicate to you when they repeat and repeat and repeat a number. So if that's the case, well, write it down. But if you just find, for example, a number, let's say 75, mentioned once in a conversation or lecture, it is not necessary for you to write it down, because at the end, that is probably merely a detail, or that is probably merely, I don't know, some sort of curiosity, but not something very much relevant, okay? Well, let me show you this with practice. So I'm gonna listen with you to this. We discussed this in the previous classes. We said that in the listening section, we have two types of materials you're going to listen. First of all, lectures, right? You know what lectures are, and also conversations. So in this case, it's a conversation. So let us listen to it together, all right? And then I'm going to use this conversation to illustrate to you a detailed question in this section, okay? So please grab your pencil and take notes on this, okay? Because it's very important. Let's go.
Listen to a conversation between a student and an administrator at the university's finance office.
Hi there. Can I help you?
I really hope you can. I'm worried I'm just really worried I'm going to be in trouble.
Oh, well, don't panic. Just relax. I'm sure we can deal with whatever's going on. What's the issue?
Well, I've received two separate statements about my tuition payments in the last week, and they seem to... It looks like they kind of contradict each other.
Uh-huh.
I've been a student here for 2 years, and I've never gotten any notice like this before. The language seems a little threatening, and I'm afraid that if I don't figure this out, I'll be kicked out of classes or something.
I can assure you that nobody's going to kick you out of class. We'll sort it out. Now, did you bring the letters with you?
Yep, I have them right here. The first one is similar to the reminder I get every month to make a payment, but
Here, let me see.
it has some extra language out of the norm. There, at the bottom. It says something about penalty payments.
All right. And did you miss any payments that you know of?
No, I've never missed one.
That's strange. And what about the second notice you received?
That one says it's the final warning to make a payment, or else my enrollment will be canceled. That doesn't make any sense because it's the first warning I ever got.
Okay, are you sure these are the only two notices you got in the mail from us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, then, it certainly seems like there's been an error, because if the statement were accurate, you would have received additional notices from us. Let me just look up your account in our database and see what the problem is.
Thank you so much. I'm just a little stressed out that something will go wrong with my classes.
Oh, sure. Just a moment while I... Huh, here we go. I think I found the problem. Did you make your last payment during a school holiday?
Sure, I mean, I think I did. I guess I made the payment during spring break. Is that a problem?
Well, you didn't do anything wrong, but it looks like there was an error in our system. The computer is supposed to automatically process payments when the offices are closed, but for some reason, your payment never went all the way through. It's still pending approval.
So why did I get only a final warning notice?
Well, I'm not completely sure, to be honest. We were coming back from a holiday, so there may have been some confusion.
Well then, I mean, what do I have to do to fix this?
Nothing at all. I'm approving the payment now and noting on your account that the error was ours. Just make your next payment on time and you won't have any more problems.
Wonderful. Thanks for taking care of this. That's a huge relief.
There you are. Well, great. Elsa also joined us, and we had listened to this conversation with Elsa before. It's the one that presented us a student who had a trouble with a notice that said that he didn't pay his tuition when he actually claimed he did so, and he wants to complain, right? And the secretary, let's say, checks out, and it turned out that he paid during a holiday, and that's the reason why all this problem came out. Well, we have listened to this conversation, and I was talking about the fourth type of question that is called detailed question. It's basically exactly the same we have discussed in the reading section. The question that says, what did the passage say about this? In our case, what did the conversation say about this particular topic? And in this type of responses, the only thing we do is to pay attention to what the passage tells us. Then we respond according to the information they give us. Remember that in this case, it is not necessary in detailed questions in the listening section to take notes on numbers or names, because as they know you listen to this material once, they are not going to be that much, let's say, picky, and they are not going to be that much demanding out of you. They are not going to ask you to memorize numbers or to pay attention to names or stuff like that. They're going to ask you questions that have to do with facts, things that you will recognize. Okay, so please never bother yourself to write down numbers or things of that. So it's just not necessary. Well, now I want to tell you something about this. Remember that I told you, right, in the listening section, all questions are multiple choice. Once again, you don't have to type anything. You don't have to, for example, they don't ask you to write what the person once said in this conversation. No, They never ask you to write or type anything. All these questions are multiple choice. Now, I told you, in the listening section, some of these questions are multiple choice, and they ask you to choose more than one answer. For example, look at this question. This question on my screen is multiple choice, yes, and it merely asks you to select one option, although it doesn't say so, right? It doesn't say choose one option, but you can realize it, or you can notice it. Why? Because it doesn't say the contrary. Because, for example, look at this other question. In this case, it is once again a multiple choice question, but look at the announcement or the sentence that it's below the question. It says choose two answers, right? It says, according to the professor, what problems would gas planets have in sustaining life? And besides, it says choose two answers. So whenever a question is going to ask you for more than one response, trust me, the question itself will tell you, hey, here you need to choose two answers, not just one. So it is not necessary for you to worry about, hey, should I pick one, two? Am I going to forget this? Am I going to oversee this? Probably no, never, because the question tells you. So if you read the entire question carefully, you are going to notice if the question requires you to choose more than one answer or merely one. As I say, when you merely have to choose one answer, it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you, hey, choose two, choose three. But when it is required, the question tells you, hey, choose two, choose three answers, choose four if it is necessary. But when it doesn't say anything, it means it's merely one answer, the one you have to choose. Okay? So please have that in mind. Now, let me show you an example of the detailed question for this conversation. A detailed question for this conversation would be, what problem does the student have? Notice that it's not asking about his name or something, or notice it's not asking about what day did he pay the tuition or something. No, it's merely a very general question, but nonetheless, it's a detailed question because it is still about the information mentioned in that conversation. It says, what problem does the student have? And then you have some options. Well, let's see. The correct answer in this case is B. He received a notice that his payment was late, right? Because if you listened carefully to what the conversation was about, this was a problem. He received a notice saying, hey, you didn't pay your tuition. If you don't do so, sorry, we're going to kick you out of classes because you are pending to pay. You have not paid. And he says, no, but I did pay, right? So what is the problem that he had? That he received a notice saying that his payment was late, that he didn't pay, right? That he had to pay yet in order to, of course, attend classes and etc. And what about A? He received another student's tuition statement. Not at all, right? The conversation, he never said something like, hey, but here my name is clearly Jack. But in the notice I received, it says Charlie. No, he didn't say something like that, right? So we cannot say he received another student's tuition statement. What about C? He forgot to pay tuition during a holiday week. In the conversation, it is actually the contrary. The conversation says he paid his tuition during a holiday week, and that's the reason why he got this problem to start with, because he paid during this holiday and no human preceded this or processed that particular payment, but the computer did it, and the computer, of course, failed. What about D? He has been barred from attending classes. The same. The conversation tells us that his greatest fear is that he is going to be kicked out of classes. He doesn't want to be banned from attending, but he never said that he was already barred from attending classes. So notice that this is confusing the information. It's telling us something as a fact, when in the conversation, it is a subjunctive commentary, right? A possibility. So notice the correct answer, B. And how do you respond to this type of questions? We have said this in the reading section. You simply pay attention to the data as it is presented to you. You use your notes. If you have forgotten some sort of detail or something, that's the reason why taking notes in the listening section is of crucial importance. And you respond according to the data they have given you. No more than that. Okay. Very good. Any question about this type of questioning, dear students? Claudia, Elsa, questions about this one? Okay. Very good. No questions then. Let's go to the fifth question. We are about to finalize this, by the way. Then we're going to practice. So here we have attitude questions. What are attitude questions? Like functional questions often deal with information that's given not just by what the speaker says, but also by how they say it. They will ask you about what information the speaker's intonation and word choice give you about the speaker's feelings and relationship towards the subject. This is interesting. Notice, for example, what if I am, imagine that for some reason, I hated medicine. I never wanted to be a doctor. I hate the profession. I simply dislike and find disgusting to help people. And I never like to, I don't know, heal wounds and to have some sort of contact with blood. Imagine that's the case. But anyways, my parents obligated me to study medicine. Imagine that's the case, hypothetical case. And imagine that I became a very good doctor because I'm talented, intelligent, I study a lot. And of course, I want to make my parents feel proud of me. If I become a teacher at some point and I teach others medicine, I can give a wonderful class about medicine. I can teach them anatomy. I can teach them how to make surgery, etc. But the fact that I like medicine can be noticed in my way of teaching. For example, imagine that I teach them like this. Well, this is a bone, and well, a bone, as you can see, contains all the tissues. I'm gonna say a bone contains all these tissues, and well, in medicine, you know, it's cool because you have the chance to save life and stuff. So when you listen to me, right, with that type of speaking, you say, well, I mean, he's teaching me something that's good. What he says is true. Maybe he's a great professor because he knows a lot about that subject. But in my way of speaking, it is very much noticeable that I do not enjoy it, right? That I'm not passionate about medicine, that I do not like medicine, because I'm talking about like that, right? Like super boring and unpassionate and I don't know, unconnected, right? You know, this is a bone and well, it contains all these tissues here and surfaces and you have this and well, this part, right? That way of speaking. So notice, that tells you about my personal opinion on the subject. And that is a differentiation I want you to make, that sometimes what the professor teaches is not necessarily his personal opinion, okay? And in this type of question, in the attitude question, what you have to do is not to look for what the professor specifically teaches on the subject, but his personal opinion, his personal perception and relationship towards the subject. Because as I say, maybe I am the best professor on medicine, but that doesn't mean that I love medicine and that I am passionate about it. And that can be noticed, as I say, by how I teach it. If I do it with passion, if I do it with enthusiasm, that's the type of trait and characteristic that somehow denounces my love and you know my fondness for medicine, right? So notice that. Now, we have listened to this lecture already with Elsa. We're gonna listen to it once again because Claudia was not here when we listened to this, all right? And this is gonna be helpful as well for Elsa to remember this particular lecture. Now notice that not every single time the opinion of somebody is denounced by his intonation. Also, the types of words you use. For example, imagine that I am your medicine teacher and I tell you, you know, well, now it's time to talk about medicine. I just find this to be not super important, but well, let's discuss it. If I tell you that, of course, I'm telling you that I have some sort of repulsion towards anatomy, right? Because my word choice, because I'm saying, well, this is not that much important. Or if I tell you, you know, anatomy, it's let's say the ugliest brother of medicine, but let us discuss it, right? So with my word choice, you can generate to yourself an image of what my personal perception on that subject is. And I'm not saying it with any intonation, it's just my word choice, the words I'm using. So in order to understand the professor's opinion on any subject, you have to not merely pay attention to his intonation, but also to his word choice. What words does he utilize in order to express himself, okay? So let us listen to this and pay attention to those particular traits. First of all, the word choice he uses, what words are being discussed and put on the table in order to discuss a particular topic, and also the intonation if it is necessary and relevant, okay? So let's listen.
How many of you have heard of Alessandro Di Mariano di Vanni Filippi? No? Nobody? Well, let me put it this way. How many of you are familiar with the work of an artist called Sandro Botticelli? Or just Botticelli? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's definitely an easier name to remember. But a lot of you might also be surprised to learn that his work fell out of favor from shortly after the Renaissance until the late 19th century. That's right. It's really only within the past 150 years that Botticelli's work has returned to popularity, and yet, within that time, his name, well, his alias, has become synonymous with the kind of grace and beauty that characterizes the best of Renaissance painting. Patronized by the famous Medici family, Botticelli's work was celebrated during his lifetime for some of these same qualities. While his earliest works often used religious subject matter, well, we've seen this throughout the course, haven't we? How common this was. These are not the works that are most celebrated today. In fact, let me ask you, what are the paintings that you most associate with Botticelli? Well, The Birth of Venus is definitely one of Botticelli's better-known works. His masterpiece, Primavera, which was painted 3 years earlier, was done in the same vein. Primavera means spring in Italian, and here's a slide of the painting just here. These are works that didn't rely entirely on the iconography of the Catholic Church. While we do see some holdovers from Botticelli's earliest work, the main subjects of these paintings go back to earlier traditions of gods and goddesses. Note the extensive use of nature as a metaphor, in addition to the nudity of some of these figures, or the skimpy clothes used to cover them. Actually, however, Botticelli was extremely religious and would end up painting work for churches and cathedrals using Catholic iconography for the rest of his life. The Madonna and Child, for example, were a popular subject. Because of that, it's kind of strange that he fell out of favor. At least his paintings were in churches, chapels, and villas all over Italy. But in 1502, almost a decade before he died, in 1510, he was already disappearing from the public eye. Even though he had painted frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, Botticelli's work was commonly overlooked in favor of that by his neighboring artist, Michelangelo. It took almost 3 centuries before an English collector, William Young Otley, bought a Botticelli in Italy and brought it back to England in 1799. Even then, the painting wasn't exhibited in public for almost another 60 years, when its next owner, William Fuller Maitland, lent it to an Art Treasures exhibition in 1856. There, it was seen by more than 1 million viewers, and art historians began to take note. Some of these historians had already taken an interest in Botticelli's Sistine Chapel's frescoes, and his reputation again began to blossom. By the end of the century, Botticelli's work had been extensively admired. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood found inspiration in them. The first monograph, or book of paintings, by the artist was published in 1893. Botticelli had the last laugh, though, in the first 20 years of the 20th century. More books were written about his art than about the art of any other painter dead or alive. It just goes to show you, the art world is ruled by trends. Just because a particular artist isn't popular at a given moment, doesn't mean that there is no value in his or her work, or that it won't be popular once more, even if it does take 3 centuries.
Great, there we are. Well, we listened to this once more, and here we are. So a question, an attitude question for this lecture on Botticelli's work could be, what is the professor's attitude towards Botticelli? Okay, and here we have the answers. He enjoys some of his work, but not all of it. He believes people would hardly recognize him by his true name, or he believes his career teaches us about religious structures. D, he considers his work has no actual relevance in our history. Well, in this case, how do you recognize the professor's opinion? Your objective is, in this question, to deduce what type of personal position or opinion does your speaker have with relation to one specific topic. This position or opinion will come up to you very clearly by paying attention to the wording he's using and or the intonation he uses, as I told you. Sometimes both of them, sometimes one of them, intonation and word choicing, okay? So please pay attention to both of these aspects, the word choice and also the intonation, okay? Very good. So in this case, which one it is? B, once again, he believes people would hardly recognize him by his true name. How do you know this? In this case, the professor didn't have any particular intonation towards Botticelli that would tell you, hey, he disliked it or he liked it. No. The only thing that we can deduce out of his personal opinion is by means of the words he used at the beginning of the lecture. When you remember, he made a question to his students and he said, do you know who is Mariano Filippetti? And nobody answered, right? And he said, what if I tell you Botticelli? And he said, oh, that's what I thought. That sentence, that's what I thought. What does that tell you? When he says, you know Mariano Filippetti? Nobody answers. But what if I tell you Botticelli? And everybody says, yeah, of course. And he says, yeah, well, that's what I thought. What does that tell you? He believes people would hardly recognize Botticelli by his true name, right? Because Botticelli was an artistic name. Nonetheless, Mariano Filippetti, his true name, right? So notice, this is what you can know out of his personal opinion. And you know it by means of his word choice. You doesn't know it by means of his intonation in this case. Sometimes the intonation also reveals such personal opinion. In this case, it is not. That means, but word choice, okay? So pay attention to both aspects. And as I say, this is very clear at the end. What about A? He enjoys some of his work, but not all of it. Cannot be because he never expresses something with dislike about Botticelli, or he never uses any type of like lazy intonation, like say, you heard a word of Venus, it's a painting, you know? That type of intonation maybe could help you to say, well, he doesn't like that particular painting, so he doesn't enjoy all of Botticelli's work, but he never said such a thing. What I will say, he believes his career teaches us about religious structures. No, he never made any type of commentary about that. Or D, he considers his work has no actual relevance in our history. Actually, this is the contrary to what the professor believes, right? Because at the end, the professor himself says, I think Botticelli goes to explain that you cannot or you can be recognized in the future, even if it takes 3 centuries, as it took him to be recognized and valued because of his work in art, right? So notice the correct answer, B. Any question, dear students, with regard to the attitude question? Something that I could clarify here? Consults, no?
The answer is letter B, right?
Yes, exactly, letter B. Okay, no questions? Okay, good. There we are. So let's continue to the last type of question, okay? This is called categorizing question. And categorizing questions ask you to sort key items from the lecture according to certain criteria. Some of the answers will usually be stated, whereas others will be implied. And the categories may differ from the most obvious ones mentioned in the lecture. Let's take a look at an example. What do I mean by this? This is very similar to, you remember in the reading section I told you, there is a type of question that is the ugliest brother of the family, let's say, because ETS almost never utilizes that type of question in the reading part. Now, translate that and move it towards the listening section, and this becomes a very common type of question that is called, as I say, categorizing question. You receive boxes, and each of these boxes has a category. And then you have some sentences or statements below these categories and boxes, and you have to drag them within the box that corresponds each of them. There is some sort of relationship between any of this, between any of these categories and the sentences, and you have to find it out, and also, of course, as I said, to drag, arrastrar, any of the sentences within the reply box that corresponds to it, okay? Well, let me show you, in order for you to understand, another passage, okay? We're gonna listen to this passage, it's the last one, we're going to listen together, and then we're going to practice, okay? So let us listen, take your notes, and then we're gonna practice with this one, the categorizing questions, okay? Let's go.
Listen to part of a lecture in a world history class.
In any introductory course, I think it's always a good idea to step back and ask ourselves, what are we studying in this class, and why are we studying it? So, for example, when you looked at the title of this course in the catalog, Introduction to World History, what did you think you were getting into? What made you sign up for it? Besides filling the social science requirement. Anyone?
Well, just the history of everything, like starting at the beginning with, I guess, the Greeks and Romans, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, that kind of stuff. Like what we did in high school.
Okay, now what you're describing is one approach to world history. In fact, there are several approaches, basic models or conceptual frameworks of what we study when we do history. And what you studied in high school, what I call the Western Heritage Model, this used to be the most common approach in U.S. high schools and colleges. In fact, it's the model I learned with when I was growing up back, about 100 years ago. At Middletown High School up in Maine. I guess it made sense to my teachers back then, since, well, the history of Western Europe was the cultural heritage of everyone in my class. And this remained the dominant approach in most U.S. schools till, maybe 30, 40 years ago. But it doesn't take more than a quick look around campus, even just this classroom today, to see that the student body in the U.S. is much more diverse than my little class in Middletown High. And this Western Heritage Model was eventually replaced by, or sometimes combined with, one or more of the newer approaches. And I want to take a minute to describe these to you today, so you can see where this course fits in. Okay, so up until the mid-20th century, the basic purpose of most world history courses was to learn about a set of values, institutions, ideas, which were considered the heritage of the people of Europe. Things like democracy, legal systems, types of social organization, artistic achievements. Now, as I said, this model gives us a rather limited view of history. So in the 1960s and 70s, it was combined with or replaced by what I call the different cultures model. The 60s were a period in which people were demanding more relevance in the curriculum, and there was criticism of the European focus that you were likely to find in all the academic disciplines. For the most part, the different cultures model didn't challenge the basic assumptions of the Western Heritage Model. What it did was insist on representing other civilizations and cultural categories in addition to those of Western Europe. In other words, the heritage of all people, not just what goes back to the Greeks and Romans, but also the origins of African, Asian, Native American civilizations. Though more inclusive, it's still basically a heritage model, which brings us to a third approach, what I call the patterns of change model. Like the different cultures model, this model presents a wide cultural perspective. But with this model, we're no longer limited by notions of fixed cultural or geographical boundaries. So then, studying world history is not so much a question of how a particular nation or ethnic group developed, but rather it's a look at common themes, conflicts, trends that cut across modern-day borders of nations or ethnic groups. In my opinion, this is the best way of studying history, to better understand current-day trends and conflicts. For example, let's take the study of the Islamic world. Well, when I first learned about Islamic civilization, it was from the perspective of Europeans. Now, with the patterns of change model, we're looking at the past through a wider lens. So we would be more interested, say, in how interactions with Islamic civilization, the religion, art, literature, affected cultures in Africa, India, Spain, and so on. Or let's take another example. Instead of looking at each cultural group as having a separate, linear development from some ancient origin, in this course, we'll be looking for the common themes that go beyond cultural or regional distinctions. So, instead of studying a particular succession of British kings or a dynasty of Chinese emperors, in this course, we'll be looking at the broader concepts of monarchy, imperialism, and political transformation.
Great. I just remember we have Claudia here, who's also a history professor. Great, right? Is this right, dear Claudia? Like all these things the professor said, is this actually true that we have this type of approaches in historical investigation?
Yes, I think so. I really like the last one because
Okay.
it's more like it's with more diversity. So yes, before that, like history was all about politics and not
Yes.
like about women, like I don't know, uh, people from under,
Mhm.
from below.
Okay.
But
Yes.
yes, I don't know how to say, but it's something called historia desde abajo.
Like out of the social scope, right, of people who are very much
Yes,
influential. Okay.
yes.
Great. Interesting. Mhm. Very good. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I always want to have somebody to ask these things to because ATS always claims, right? Like we have people who are professional in this area to make researches for us, and that's how we get the information. But it's always great to have somebody to consult, right? Thank you very much, Claudia. Great. So we have this question, and as I told you, very simple how to respond. That you have these three categories in this case that are part of the lecture. In this case, the three types of historical approach or investigation that the professor discussed. And we have the Western heritage model, the different cultures model, and then the patterns of change model. So below this, we have three different sentences or statements, and we have to introduce each of them to the category it corresponds. In here, it gives us a hint, let's say, of how to find this out. It tells us, match each of the topics below with the type of work history course in which it would most likely be discussed. So it's helping us how to identify which category pertains to each of the sentences. It's telling us, think about these sentences as if they were topics. And if you were to teach these topics in a class about history using each of these models, in which class would you teach it? It's helping us, as you can see, to know where could we insert these sentences. And well, for example, the first one, the contributions of Native Americans art to the United States culture. Which one is it? This is, of course, the different cultures model, right? Because it's teaching us how so that the Native Americans helped the United States culture to be developed and what aspects of the Native American culture did the US copy or let's say appropriated to his new and of course ingenious and innovative culture, right? So as you can see, this topic would definitely be part of the different cultures model, right? Because we are talking about two cultures separately and how they interacted with each other, how the US interacted with these indigenous people from America who were there before they arrived, etc. What about B, the independent discovery of printing techniques in Asia and Europe? Of course, B would be part of the third category. You will have to insert or drag this sentence within the third box, right? Because this belongs to the patterns of change model. That is to say, how different societies reacted to a single event or a single discovery. In this case, the discovery of printing techniques in Asia and Europe. So we are not discussing, as Claudia said, a particular group or a particular political, let's say, interest or a political perspective. We are discussing how different people reacted to the same thing. And in this case, reacted to printing techniques and how Asian and European people did react to printing techniques, right? So this will be part of the patterns of change model. And somebody who teaches this type of history would take this topic and would teach it, right? And finally, we have ancient Roman foundations of the United States of legal systems. And well, as a lawyer, I can tell you, yeah, of course, this is part of the first one because the US system, especially in its legal part, is so much influenced by ancient Roman foundations that is obviously part of the Western heritage model, right? That is to say, all this knowledge and these concepts that were borrowed from the Western civilization, that is to say, the Roman Empire, the Greeks, right? And how we took all those concepts of nation, of power, of justice, of laws and rights, etc. And we moved all that into our current societies in the Third World. This is certainly part of what you would teach in this type of history approach, right? How Rome helped to create this new sense of justice and rights that pertain now to the Western civilization in Latin America and the US, of course. So you would drag this one to the first box, right? And this is how you do it. As I said, you read the question. It helps you to know how to insert the sentences within the reply box, and you insert each of the sentences in the category that corresponds to each of them. Okay. Any question about this type of questioning, dear students? Any consult here? No. Okay. No consultant. Very good. So we have finalized with that, and let us practice now. Okay. I want you to practice with me. I'm gonna start with the simulator. Please grab a piece of paper or something to write down with, because we are going to practice. Okay. We're going to listen to a lecture or conversation in this opportunity, and then we're going to respond. Okay. We're going to listen to a conversation in this case because it's shorter, and given that we don't have too much time, we're going to use the time we have very much wisely, so that we can, of course, respond to all questions and to offer some feedback at the end, right? So please, we're going to listen to a conversation, all right? And tomorrow, the entire class is going to be dedicated to practice anyways, so don't worry. We're going to practice lectures as well. So let us go, okay? Please get your piece of paper, listen to this conversation, and also prepare yourself to respond to questions later. Okay, let's go.
Listen to a conversation between a student and her professor.
Hello, Kate. What can I help you with this afternoon?
Hello, Professor Thompson. I'm sorry if this seems a little combative of me, but I'm concerned about the grade I got on the research paper I submitted for contemporary American literature last week.
I don't think you're being combative at all, Kate. I mean, I find it refreshing when students are willing to be proactive about things like grades. Now, what's your concern about your paper?
Well, I'm a bit disappointed in the grade. I got a B-, and while I know that's not a grade many students would be disappointed by, I really wonder if that's the grade I deserved.
It certainly wasn't meant to be an insult.
Oh, I know, but I mean, my paper met all of the guidelines you set out for the assignment in the syllabus. I gave a lot more than the required number of sources for my work. I provided visual aids to help highlight my points, and, well, I sourced all of them as well, including the pictures. I formatted the text perfectly, and I also triple-checked the bibliography to make sure that it was properly formatted too.
Yes, it was very well sourced and perfectly formatted. I did notice that.
Okay, so as far as I can tell, I really did nothing wrong, or at least nothing that would drop my grade to a B-. So I'm wondering why my grade was that low.
Well, to be honest, Kate, I think your paper was very well written. The issue I had with it was, the problem was with the arguments you made in the paper. You're obviously very passionate about comic books, and it shows in your work. But I just don't think you adequately proved to me that comic books qualify as American literature.
Really? I thought my point was pretty clear.
Personally, I was only ever interested in comics when I was a child. I haven't read them in years, and I still very much think of them as something made for children, or for adults who simply don't want to grow up. Now, I'm willing to admit that might be prejudice on my part, and as I read your paper, I was looking for something to convince me I was wrong. But I'm afraid I just didn't find it.
But my paper specifically mentioned several famous American comic books with serious literary merit. Watchmen was named one of the greatest novels ever written, despite being a comic book, and Mouse won a Pulitzer Prize. Many people accept comics as a place where serious literary work can be done.
I think that's a fair point, but it's not a point you fully made in your paper. If that's the argument you'd like to make now, I have to call attention to the fact that you chose to focus your study on the superhero comics of the 1960s, which are far less literary in nature than the examples you just mentioned.
Well, I did focus on those, but the point was to lay a foundation for the literary study of comic books by focusing on early classics from the field. I argued that those comics of the 1960s are precursors to the more serious work that followed in later decades.
That's a fair point, but again, I don't believe you made it well in the paper. You seem very passionate about this, though, so I will allow you to revise the paper to better reflect the arguments you're making now. If you manage to convince me this time, I'll up your grade. Does that seem fair?
Yes, Professor. Thank you.
Oh, great. Very good. Now, let's proceed with the questions You remember I told you, in the listening section, you cannot administer your time by yourself. You do not receive, for example, I don't know, 20 minutes to respond to 5 questions you get in this conversation. The way it works is that ETS gives you a maximum per question, okay? And that maximum is always constant. That is to say, if in the first question, you take 10 seconds to respond, the question, you're very secure, and then you respond it, and you go to the next question, you are not going to be able to say, okay, well, in the last question, I just spent 10 seconds. So can I use the rest of my time in this question and then have more time to respond to the second one that I find most difficult? No, you cannot. Because as I say, normally ETS gives you 4 or 5 seconds per question to respond and read what the question says. And as I say, if you respond the question before that time is over, they don't accumulate your timing for the next question. That is to say, in the first question, if you respond in 10, you cannot claim 35 extra seconds in the second question to respond the second one as well. You get 4 or 5 seconds per each question. Doesn't matter or not mattering how much you get and invest on each particular question. Okay, so please know that. And here, we have the first question for this conversation. Okay, so I'm gonna activate this chronometer, and this is going to emit the sounds when the 4 or 5 seconds are over. Okay, so when the 4 or 5 seconds are over, we're going to respond, and we're going to change the other question. Okay, so one by one, you're gonna respond publicly, but of course, privately on your own. Take your own notes on what responses you are choosing, because at the end we're going to compare. Okay, so let's go. Let's start. This one's gonna respond, or it's gonna be responded by Claudia. Okay, so please, dear Claudia, pay attention to this one, and in this case, Elsa as well. Read it and respond it, but you're gonna just write it on your paper. And the next one, you're gonna well, reveal it publicly, okay, to all of us. But let's go. Okay, let's read and respond this one.
B.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Claudia. So let's go to the next question. In this case, let's go with Elsa. Okay, you get 4 or 5 seconds again, Elsa.
Perfected the formatting
Okay.
and used the visual aids.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to the next question. This one is yours, Claudia. You can go.
I am not sure, but I think that is A.
All right, very good. Let's go to the next one. This is yours, dear Elsa.
See?
Okay, which one? Excuse me. C, you said? This one?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, those are the 4 or 5 seconds. Let's go with Claudia, the last one.
A.
Okay, Great. Very good. So we're going to stop here because those are all the questions for this conversation. And now let's go and check them out, okay, to see if you got it correctly. Okay. Awesome. So I think all of you actually got them very well, but let's review them. So why does the student visit the professor? And here you responded B, and it was correct because she received a grade she believes was unwarranted, right? And this is very much easy to notice because she goes to the professor in the first seconds of this conversation and says, Professor, I'm sorry, but I know this B minus is not something to complain for other students, but I believe that I did everything well and actually better than you asked for, right? So she received a grade that she considers to be unwarranted, that wasn't proper for her particular paper. Good. Next question was, according to the student, what did she do to her original paper? This is what she mentioned as, let's say, as an argument for telling the professor, hey, I deserve more grades than this, right? Because she said, hey, but I did a perfect formatting. I even used visual aids when you didn't ask to. So why did you give me this particular B minus? I deserve more, right? So when she was mentioning that, she talked about this and you got it pretty well. She perfected the formatting and she used visual aids. Great. What about next question? What is the professor's attitude toward comic books? Okay, so this one is also good. It's correct. It says he thinks that they do not usually qualify as literature, and it's fine because if you remember, the professor said, right? And you notice this by his word choice. He said, you know, I just read this when I was a child, and I've always believed that they do not actually bestow or, let's say, convey any type of characteristic of advanced literature, right? So by his word choice, you could very good deduce that he didn't consider this to be literature or a very good literature at least, right? Because he said, well, this is for children alone. And I have not been reading this in a long, long time. So, well, then it's not part of literature, right? So great. It was a very good response. What about 4? Why does the student mention Watchmen and Moss? In this case, to highlight some comic books with highly regarded literary qualities. It's also good because this is when the student responded to the professor's allegation that comics are not considered literature by contemporary scholars. And she said, but wait a minute, Watchmen, that is a comic or a graphic novel, was prized with a Pulitzer, right? A Pulitzer Prize. And it has been considered to be one of the greatest novels ever written. So why do you say that, right? So in this case, it's to highlight some comic books with highly regarded literary qualities, okay? And finally, we have the question number 5. In this case, it says, according to the professor, what should the student do to get a better grade? And this is what the professor says at the end to his student. He says, you know, well, I listened to you. I think that your complaint is warranted. I'm going to give you the opportunity to rewrite your paper. And if you manage to convince me this time, I'm going to up your grade. Is that fine to you? And she says, yeah, of course, thank you. So what he's saying, in other words, is please rewrite this paper. If you offer a better argument than the ones you have offered before, I'm going to give you a better grade, right? So rewrite her paper with a stronger argument. Very good. I think that you are doing pretty great, actually. So I'm looking forward to see what you're going to do tomorrow, because tomorrow, as I said, we're going to practice for this the entire class. But before you go, let me give you something that I was preparing this afternoon for you. And that's more practice, okay? I want to give you practices. Here, this one, there you are. And also here, where is it? This one. So you have a lot of resources there to practice, okay? The listening section. And trust me, this is gonna be great for you to improve your capacities and skills on this section. And you can use it to practice in your free time, all right? But anyways, tomorrow we're going to practice with me. So please, I commend you to have a good pair of headphones tomorrow because we're going to be listening a lot. Okay, so please, before you go, help me with your kind responses to our traditional poll. And please let me take your assistance. We have to take 2 polls today, actually, because of the weekly necessity and requirement. But anyways, okay, here we are. All right.
Teacher,
Yes, Claudia?
in Christmas, we are going to have classes
Yeah.
like that week.
Yeah, I mean, of course, but you know, the thing is that I'm seeing here that we're going to finalize our classes tomorrow, actually, because we have covered all the material. But if you mean like if you can reserve like personal calls, yeah, of course you can. I think you can. It depends on what they decide at the end, but you can know that through the website, right? Through ETS website. Excuse me. Yeah, no, tell me. Yeah, Claudia.
So tomorrow is the last class?
Yeah, it's actually the last class. I am also surprised that time went so rapidly. Yeah, but yeah, it's actually the last class. You're right, because if you look at it, I'm gonna share my screen with you. Like this is all these are all the weeks we've been going through, like this one, right? So like first week, second week, third week, fourth week, fifth week, and we are in the sixth one. So as you can see, like the last class is tomorrow on Friday 16th. Okay, but anyways, don't worry. At the end, we're gonna have like, if you continue taking the personal calls, we're gonna have more time together practicing the speaking section. Okay, but anyways, thank you very much then for your time tonight, and I see you tomorrow. Okay, to practice the listening section. Okay, have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. See you later. Bye bye.